Still muted, huh? Output. Any luck now? Nope, still muted. Oh, crud. Okay, so that limits it to the microphone then. Okay, good. Yeah, what happened was OBS Studio did an upgrade and it scrambled a lot of my plugins. I did a rollback and well, didn't fix everything. So I'm glad we're back though. So it probably requires some tweaks during the week, but yeah, this is at least we're working here. Well, anyway, I want to welcome you all to our 68th live stream, Uncultured as a Philistine. You know, celebrating that well-known Philistine culture. It has been a exciting week with the death of the queen. Long live the king. So yeah, it's been quite a week, and you know, in Canada here we're going through the 10 days of mourning that the rest of the Commonwealth is going through as well. So yeah, some people don't care. Some people are really broken up over it. She was a figurehead. All our money's going to change eventually. Because with the accession of a new ruler, a new monarch, all our coinage is going to change. Some of our dollar bills are going to change. So yeah, it's kind of weird to say King Charles III. So anyway, we're going to get into your questions. We have a lot of super chats tonight. The rules are the same as always. Super chats have priorities. If you want to do a non-super chat, we do take non-super chat questions too. We ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question, so when I scan through the live chat, I can see what's directed to me personally. I ask that you only post the question once. Posting multiple times will get your question thrown out because it just confuses me as I'm scanning through it. So I also ask that if it has to do with a Bible verse or a foreign word, you give me the book in the Bible with chapter and verse, or the language that you think the word comes from, so I have some frame of reference, some context to actually go off of. So with that said, let's get into this, and we'll start taking a few non-super chats to start off the session, and then we'll get right into the super chats, because we got a lot of them tonight. So our first question is going to come from M. Scotty. And he asks, what are some of the arguments you would present against the idea of an evil god like Rene Descartes' demon? Okay. Now, this has to do with the idea of maltheism. Basically, mal meaning bad, theism being God. The belief in a god, anyway. So, belief in an evil god. Now, it's not really an area that I do a lot of work in. So, I don't have a lot of arguments here for this, and exploring this topic a little bit went down some very, very interesting rabbit trails. And I don't feel prepared really to answer this question on a live stream like tonight. So, I'm going to actually not say too much about it. It does affect things such as ethics. It affects things such as worship. You know, and I think this is a topic better saved for a Monday video, honestly, where I have some more time to think about this, where I have some more time to do reading on it, and to really engage the question properly. I think it's a good question. I think it's a very, very good question. It's just a little more expansive than I can do in a live stream here. So I'm sorry I can't answer the question right now. I mean, briefly, one of my philosophy teachers talked about monotheism, and he said, if God is all evil, why would you want to serve him anyway? So, but I think that doesn't do the topic quite justice. So, with that said, um, thank you very much for that question. It's an interesting question, and we will do more on this, just not right now. Yeah, because we want to go deeper on this, and that's the reason we want to go deeper. We think this question deserves a deeper answer. So we'd much rather do that in a Monday video than try to do this in a Q&A session. Oh, I should also let you all guys know that I'm actually recovering right now from my second bout of COVID. So I was a little under the weather last week, and I'm still coughing up stuff. So if you hear me coughing to the side, that's what's going on. Yeah, so I'm still sort of recovering from a second bout of this. So if you hear me cough up along, that's what's going on. Okay. Our next question was actually from Vic M. Now, he had posted these questions last week, and I told him, to repost them and see if I could, better engage this week. Now, I did look these up, and the first one he asks about the Brian Donnelly Lewis article, Kirbit Kefea Ostraca, a new collation based on the multispectral images. Now, it's in a journal that I subscribe to, which is Bezor. And I looked around the apartment, and I haven't received that issue yet. So it's probably stuck in the post. And I can't seem to get it off of my university website right now. So I don't actually have a copy of that first article to review. So I might receive that journal in a month or two. Who knows with Canada Post? So I can't comment on the first question. Now, the second question. Do you agree with Helen Cavigny that the earliest depiction of Moses discovered so far is on the ostraca of Umbalad? In her article. Now, I was able to look this one up. This one I was able to look up. The ostraca looks like it dates to about the Roman period. Is Roman or Hellenistic? The ostraca, which is a potsherd with a drawing or writing on it, has no writing on it, but it has a picture of what looks like a prophet. Now, is it Moses? I don't know. Honestly, it looks like a generic prophet, but it's hard to say. It's hard to say. It looks definitely like a depiction of a prophet. Is it Moses per se? Who knows? It could have even been Elijah, honestly. So I can't say I completely agree with her conclusions, but I do think that it's a very interesting ostraca. It is very suggestive. It is very, very suggestive of a prophetic figure of some kind. It is a man. He's walking on a staff. He's wearing a mantle. These are things you would expect of a prophet. So, I don't know if I agree with her completely, but I think she's onto something. So, anyway, I hope that answered your second question. If I get that article, if Canada Post just hasn't burned it or thrown it away, I will, probably do an update at some point and maybe discuss the article. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Very much appreciated. Okay, our third non-super chat is from the Penius Theologian. And he asks, the Book of Kings seems to differentiate degrees of sin. 2 Kings 10:20-32. What exactly was the sin of Jeroboam? Different temples, images of Yahweh, new gods. In what way was Ahab worse? All right. Let's pull up 2 Kings. Go to chapter 10. and 28. And it says, starting at verse 28, thus Jehu eradicated Baal out of Israel. However, as for the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin, for these Jehu did not depart. Even the golden calves that were at Bethel and that were at Dan. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in executing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which he had made Israel sin. In those days, the Lord began to cut off portions from Israel, and Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel. Okay. Now, what is the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat? For that, we need to go to 1 Kings chapter 13. First Kings chapter 13, verse 1. Now, this is the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Now, behold, there came a man from Judah to Bethel by the word of the Lord, while Jeroboam was standing by the altar to burn incense. That's the sin of Jeroboam right there. What he did was he would enter into the temples and he would burn incense in place of a priest. So that's what's going on there. He is confusing the role of king and priest. So this was a big, big deal for Israelites because the king was not allowed to fulfill the role of a priest. Priests were priests, kings were kings, and the two roles were never supposed to commingle. So when Jeroboam went into a temple to burn incense directly to God, that was a no-no. That was a definite no-no. Now, so it wasn't that it was just different temples. It was that he was fulfilling a role he was not supposed to do. And you go on later on in this narrative where Jeroboam, threatens a prophet. He threatens a prophet, and he's punished, and then he's healed. Okay? So he's given a warning shot. But this is his sin, is that he's burning incense in a temple. Now, what way is Ahab worse? Ahab entreated the prophets of Baal. So the way that what Jeroboam is practicing here is aberrant Yahwehism. So he's worshiping Yahweh, but not in the way that is acceptable to Yahweh. Ahab is bringing the Baals in, the idols, Astartes, Reshefs, all the Canaanite deities, and he's worshiping them. So it is a different class of sin. A much, much more serious class of sin for Ahab than is for Jeroboam. But then again, too, Jeroboam starts this trajectory that leads up to Ahab. So anyway, I just saw the most recent super chat and couldn't help but laugh. But okay, so anyway, that's the difference here. So that's the sin of Jeroboam is burning incense and practicing aberrant Yahwehism. Ahab is doing full out idolatry. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question and very, very interesting question. So, okay, and our last non-super chat for the opening segment is from Magnificent Universe. Can you please elaborate Brian Wood's main arguments for redating Jericho and why you disagree with them? Okay. Jeroboam still on Jeroboam. Jericho, Brian Wood's argument for redating Jericho hinges on essentially two sort of lines of thinking. The first line of thinking is a sort of an absence of evidence thinking. He basically says that there is no ruins, no destruction layer after City 4, the City 4 occupation, the Middle Bronze City 4 occupation. So he says there's no subsequent occupation until the Iron Age. And yet he makes note that there's a scarab of Amenhotep III there, that there's some Cypriot ware there that seems to date to that 1400-ish late 14th century period. So he's going to say, oh, we find this fragment of Cypriot ware, we find the scarab of Amenhotep III, and Brentwood is using the high chronology that's now defunct, but he's stating Amenhotep III to around 1400 BC. Now, there's problems with this. Okay, there's a lot of problems with this. One, we can no longer date Amenhotep III to 1400 BC. His dates are pretty much a firm 1351 to 1389. Okay. Now, for a lot of people, that difference of 10 years doesn't really matter that much. But for an early person who supports the early date, who's trying to calculate this down to the exact year, yeah, that 10 years matters. But it's the Amarna letters that prevents the reign of Amenhotep III from going any earlier than that. The other thing is that the recent excavations of Lorenzo Nigro show that after the Middle Bronze fortifications were destroyed at Jericho, it was actually rebuilt. Jericho was rebuilt. And it was built with mud brick fortifications. And that there was a settlement there that went all the way through Late Bronze 1 into Late Bronze 2A and conceivably into Late Bronze 2B, although those layers were removed by site leveling. So it's not like there wasn't anything there. We now have evidence that there was a settlement there, and a settlement that survived for, throughout most of the Late Bronze Age. Now, we don't know exactly what happened in Late Bronze 2B, but if it is the same layer as Garstang's Late Bronze destruction layer, then that places that destruction in around 1200 BC, not 1400 BC. So that's essentially Brian Wood's main argument, is that there's an absence of material. There's nothing there. Essentially, it's an absence of evidence, therefore evidence of absence. Coupled by that Amenhotep scarab plus the Cypriot fragment, Cypriot ware fragment. Thus, he takes that whole Middle Bronze fortification and dates it to 1400 as opposed to the 1550 that almost every archaeologist accepts. Now, there's also the second problem, too, with Jericho, which is that even if you did manage to redate the City 4 destruction, it's the wrong type of wall. It's a Middle Bronze fortification. It's clear from the narrative that what Rahab the harlot was living in was a casemate wall, where you have two walls and people used to live between the walls. It's kind of like your ancient equivalent of a multi-story apartment. People lived in between the walls. They would put more bricks in there and floors, and they would make an apartment out of it. And that's where Rahab lived, is in between the walls. So with the Middle Bronze fortification, you got one big, massive stone cyclopean wall. You can't live inside that. So, there's also the fact, too, that there's evidence of battering rams that were constructed to demolish the Middle Bronze fortification. So there's things that don't fit the biblical narrative if he wants to make City 4 to be the result of Joshua's conquest. So his identification here and his redating is very problematic. It's very, very problematic. So, and besides, we now have a really good explanation now for the presence of that Cypriot ware and the scarab, which was that it was occupied. Now, again, late bronze cemetery would have to have a late bronze town. The writing was on the wall anyway, for this, but now we have actually firm evidence of this. So I don't think anyone should take Brian Wood's argument, seriously. I mean, no one ever did, really, but except some early daters. But archaeologists across the board, rejected his redating outright because it just didn't make much sense. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. It's a great question, and I hope that brought some light to it. Okay, now we're on to the super chats. Our first super chat is from Andrew Cahill for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. In a previous live stream, you said that Genesis 2 says Cush rather than Kish due to a translation error, but my Hebrew Bible says Cush. Is this a quirk of the Masoretic text or the Leningrad Codex? Okay. It's a quirk of the Masoretic system. Okay. Now, we have to understand in the Masoretic text, the consonants are inspired, the vowels are not. This is a tricky thing. This is a tricky thing. Because the vowels were added in later by the Masoretes. And the Masoretes were a bunch of Jewish scribes that tried to put together a version of the Hebrew Old Testament that had all the vowel pointings, and they made some other scholarly additions as well. But they added the vowel pointings. They even added the spaces. Okay? And we now know sometimes they got it right, sometimes they didn't. So there were times when they would add a vowel and it's not the correct vowel. Sometimes they would add a space and it's in the wrong place. So spaces and it comes even down to stuff like chapter breaks, verse, separations. These things are not inspired parts of the text. They were added later. So we have to understand when we look at something like Cush, it didn't originally come to the Masoretes with the vowels. They added them in. Now, they had a traditional reading, and they would apply that traditional reading to the text. But that traditional reading wasn't always correct. So I think in this particular case, this is a translational error. This is adding the wrong vowel to the text. So instead of a U, it should have been a I. So anyway, and we do actually find this across Masoretic editions. So it does seem to be something that's common to, say, the Masoretic way of pronouncing this. So you'll find it both in the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex. But it just does seem to come out of that Masoretic system of reading. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. We find this happening in a couple other places too. Like, for example, there's I forget which verse it is. The name Ramses. They add an extra A to it. So a lot of translations will translate it Ramses. Okay. The The consonants are the same across, say, the various verses with Ramses in it. But there's one small Masoretic a place where the Masoretes add an extra vowel through Masoretic pointing. So this happens. This definitely happens. And it's not as uncommon as we think it is. It does happen in several places in the Old Testament. It doesn't change the meaning of much. In this particular case, it changes geography a little. Okay? Actually, a lot. But it doesn't actually change the intended meaning all that significantly. And I think future editions of Bible translations will account for this error because, I mean, it's quite obvious. It's well known in the Assyriological literature. So, anyway, thank you very much for this super chat. Very much appreciate it. Next super chat is again from Andrew Cahill. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, do you have any theories as to why Shishak did not seem to include Jerusalem on the Bubastite portal? Yes, I do. Let's see if I can find this in the text. Yeah. All right, I'm going to bring up here 1 Kings 14. Okay. And the text reads, now it came about in the 5th year of Rehoboam that Shishak, the king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. Notice it does not say conquered Jerusalem, it's that came up against it. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and he took everything, even taking all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. All right, so this is what's going on. We have to remember that Egyptians weren't into conquest. They were into loot. Okay? If they have all the treasures already, they have no reason to sack your town. They don't want to sack your town. It wastes lives, it wastes time. They just would rather tax you. Because the Egyptians are trying to support 3,000 years of inflation. That's really what they're trying to do with their hegemony. Yeah, 3,000 years is a lot of time to accumulate inflation. So, that's why they went on campaign. They were out to do a shakedown of all the villages and towns that could give them some loot. And they would take that loot, bring it back to Egypt, and that would lower the price of everything. So this was really, really important for the Egyptian economy. But they didn't care about ruling. That wasn't their intent. So what looks like happens here is King Rehoboam just gave Shishak all the goodies. He gives them all the goodies. There's no need to attack Jerusalem. They got what they came for. They're going on to the next town. And that's what they do. We see, for example, like if you read the Bubastite portal, they actually come, they do the typical go up the coastal plain into the Jezreel Valley, and then they come back down into the Judean foothills. And they make pretty much a straight line towards Jerusalem, and then they veer west. Very interesting. Very interesting. It does seem to be that Rehoboam just gave them the stuff, and avoided a fight that way. And the Egyptians were more than happy with that situation. They took all the stuff, went home, and start melting it down for funerary goods, idols, that sort of thing. So yeah, they got what they came for. They got what they came for, and they left. So that's why Jerusalem does not appear to be on the Bubastite portal. There was no need for them to conquer it. They got what they wanted already. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answers your question. Very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Any opinion on the new Ishmael inscription that was recently found? It's said to be genuine and the date around 6th to 7th century BC. How will this affect any evidence for the Bible? Okay, I have heard a little bit about this. I am reserving judgment on this right now. There is some evidence to suggest it could be a counterfeit. Basically, a genuine parchment with a inscription or a forged a piece of writing over it. I know Christopher Ralston has already written to basically say, hey, you know, this was found on the antiquities market. This wasn't a provenanced item. Okay, it's on the antiquities market. You gotta be suspicious that it's counterfeit. You have to be suspicious of this. This is one of those times when it's guilty until proven innocent. So I'm always very, very cautious of anything that comes off the antiquities market because you just don't know where it came from. You don't know who was producing it, and Israeli antiquities markets have a long history of forgeries. Long history of forgeries. So, again, I'm going to reserve total judgment until we get some more info in. Now, I don't think this will affect the Bible. Even if it does prove to be genuine, I don't think it's going to affect the evidence of the Bible in any way. If some guy out there a second person is named Ishmael, that doesn't really affect the Bible in any way. So, even if it does turn out to be genuine, it's such a small fragment, and I don't think there's a lot here that's really sort of it's interesting, but I don't think it's again, it's got the name Ishmael. Maybe not. Who knows? So I'm going to reserve judgment on this until I get more info and more expert reports come out on this. And I'm sure there will. I'm sure there will. There always is. Okay, there's always is more expert info that does come out on this stuff. So, again, I would recommend reserving completely, saying, okay, I don't know if it's fake. I don't know if it's real. I'm going to assume it's suspect until I get some sort of corroborating evidence. A corroborating evidence attests both the ink and the parchment, not just the parchment. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat, again, comes from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much. Hi, Dr. Falk. Any evidence Isaiah was split in two and wasn't all written by Isaiah, or was written after Cyrus conquered Babylon? Scholarly consensus. Well, scholarly consensus is that there's an Isaiah 1 and an Isaiah 2. There was a commentary many years ago. I forget who wrote it. It wasn't a very good commentary on Isaiah. I remember that. But he had one very interesting theory about Isaiah. And that it was a single composition, but it was also a giant chiasm. So it's written in one order in one direction, and then the order is reversed in the other. Very interesting. It's a very interesting idea, and it lended plausibility that Isaiah could have been a single composition done by one human being, or a human being and his amanuensis. And at that point, you got to then ask, well, Cyrus conquering Babylon, is that futuristic prophecy? Is that ex eventu prophecy? That's a different scholarly question. And is that a later insertion after? You do have to ask those questions. And scholarly consensus does seem to be that you have, say, the first Isaiah 1, the first half of Isaiah, which is, written by the original Isaiah, and then you have what Isaiah 2. Some will even break it up into 3 and 4 as well, where they say that the school of Isaiah wrote the rest. Well, I'm not quite buying that. But there are scholars who believe that, and the scholarly consensus does seem to be that there's more than one Isaiah. I think it's a single book. I think it's a single composition, and I think it's a single composition done in a particularly a literary fashion. So, interestingly enough, when they look at Isaiah scrolls, there does seem to be a break in the text right about at that midway point. So that's very interesting too. There does seem to be some corroboration that it's written and then it's resumed. And that break does seem to be where that sort of chiastic structure crosses, which is actually a different point than most scholars would place Isaiah 1 and Isaiah 2. So, it's very interesting. It's very interesting when you see you see this, for example, in the Great Isaiah scroll. So, where it actually breaks in a certain place in the text and then picks up again. So, fascinating. It's actually fascinating. You actually see that in the artifact of a first century Isaiah scroll. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped answer the question. Our next super chat is again from Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Egyptian loanwords after the Pentateuch, prophets and writings. Could it be used to argue against loanwords in Exodus for Pentateuch being written early? No, not necessarily. And because here's the thing, you do get this. You do get this. Like, for example, there's an argument that's sometimes made that the loanword sesh, which means linen, it's Egyptian linen. It occurs in the Pentateuch. It also occurs in some of the later writings and the prophets also. And it's a word that, some people will say, oh, well, see, we find it in the later prophets. Therefore, Egyptian loanwords in the Torah could have been written at a later time. There's a problem with this, though. And that problem is that some of those loanwords, retain an older form of Egyptian that petered out after Dynasty 19. Like, for example, the word for chest, tabat. It has that T at the end of the word that drops off after Dynasty 19. So, in preserving the structure of those words, we can see that the loanwords in the Exodus had to come from an earlier period of time than, say, the Persian period or the Babylonian period or even the Iron Age, for that matter. For example, later on, dynasties 2021, etc., Tabat turns into Tabah. So we actually see the structure of ancient Egyptian preserved as it would have appeared in the late Bronze Age, and even, say, Middle Bronze period. So that's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And you wouldn't have had it preserved in that way if the Pentateuch had been written at a later period of time. Because the Egyptians weren't speaking that way anymore. They just weren't speaking like that any longer. It was just, they were just recording what was around them. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Next one is from Brick Creation again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. If I gave quick evidence for Exodus, is Semitic people left from Avardis altar at Mount Ebal, 3 cities burned with fire, Israelite occupation, diet, swift in Canaan, sufficient enough. That's a good question. Well, the whole question of the evidence of the Exodus is an inductive argument. It's essentially you are piling evidence upon evidence of evidence upon evidence, and the strength of an inductive argument increases the more evidence you add. So, yes, absolutely. If you've got Semitic people leaving Avaris at mid Dynasty 19, that's right in the middle of the reign of Ramses II. Okay, you've got a piece of evidence. You got a late bronze altar at Mount Ebal about 40 years later. That's a piece of evidence. You've got the late bronze destruction layer of Garstang at Jericho. That's a piece of evidence. You got a late bronze destruction layer at Hatzor. That's a piece of evidence. You've got continuity of diet between Avaris and the 13th century, 13th to 12th century settlements that pop up in Canaan. So, these are pieces of evidence that just sort of build upon each other. You got the loanwords, you got the Ark of the Covenant. Each is a piece of evidence. No single piece will get you sufficiency. But here's the thing. History is a probabilistic thing. What's the probability of this actually happening? If each piece of evidence moves the dial a couple percent, you can certainly build up a very, very good argument. The problem is doing this quickly is very, very difficult. It's very difficult to do inductive arguments fast. Deductive arguments, absolutely, you could do those really, really fast. Ancient history doesn't often work using deductive arguments. A lot of it is done by induction. So, to get sufficiency, you need a lot of evidence. You need a mountain of evidence. And I think we've got that for the Exodus. But you kind of got to go through it all. And that is the challenge. I remember when I was on Cameron Bartuzzi's channel, one of my first interviews, and he's not a very patient man. He's not a very patient man. Nice guy, but not a patient man. He wants that 30-second ironclad argument. Give it to me now. I want it now. And you really can't do that when you're trying to make a historical case. Good history doesn't work that way. Good history is slow. You build it brick by brick. You're building a pyramid, essentially. Brick by painful brick. So, it's not something you can just do very, very fast. Now, you can do I would say if you had to do this argument very, very minimally, let's say you only have an elevator pitch. Okay, you've got maybe 60 seconds. Okay. You have a big Semitic city at Avaris. They leave mid-Dynasty 19. The son of Ramses II, he dies in the 25th year of Ramses II. Approximately 40 years later, destruction of Jericho, destruction of Hatzor, Mount Ebal. And then you got the Merneptah Stela that basically names the Israelites in the Promised Land in 1217 BC. Basically his 5th regnal year. So, if you got that, you've got at least, you can actually then make that case that you had that over historic evidence that I think already at that point pushes it over, say, the 50% probability limit. Once you're beyond that 50% probability of this is a historical event, then, you're at least got you come out of that elevator with a guy maybe saying, maybe I have to think about this. And then I think at that point, you at that point can at least have an argument that's going to get you some traction. Okay, but it is just there's just so many little pieces of evidence to this thing that it's hard for you to get sufficiency to everyone's satisfaction. Okay, so thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, if God created everything, one perfect, wouldn't that make him unneeded? Wherefore, he couldn't logically exist without purpose. That's why everything isn't perfect. Does this help against the problem of evil? If a perfect God exists, he would have made everything perfect. Similar to, can God create a rock so big that he could not carry it? Absurdity, wouldn't it be error to make himself unnecessary? Okay. Now, we have to kind of understand a few things about creation. Creation isn't perfect. It's good. There is a difference. Okay? God made creation to be good, but not necessarily perfect. So, there is still the necessity for God, even in a good creation, one that God has made. You know, it is maybe without sin, but it still needs God. It's contingent upon its creator. So because creation is contingent upon its creator, it still needs the creator. God's not working himself out of a job here. This is not a deist conception of God. It's a conception of God where he exists, he creates, he has relationship with his creation. He knows his creation needs him. His creation isn't going to do very, very well without him. This is why God walks in the garden with man. Because man needs God. God, God doesn't need man, but man needs God. So that contingent nature of the created order, and basically the most contingent part of that created order is man himself. Mankind needs God. We're lost without him. Yeah, we try to do things on our own, and we mess it up every time. So, he's not going to work himself out of a job here. That's not the way creation works. He creates, makes it good, but it's not perfect. There's still room to grow, still room to learn and advance for mankind. So, mankind did not, wasn't created knowing everything. We have to learn it. We're not perfect. Even in Adam and Eve, when they were created good, but not perfect. Otherwise, they would have never fallen. They'd been perfect. So, there's a reason why. Because everything still depends upon God. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat is again from Brick Creation for $20. Thank you very much for super chat. Any evidence during biblical times, land of Canaan, Babylonian exile, that child sacrifices occurred? Oh, yes. Are you familiar with the archaeologist Stuart McAllister excavation at Gezer in 1902, The Iniquity of the Amorites? I have not read McAllister's excavation at Gezer. But I know there's evidence for child sacrifice. And the reason why is we see it on Egyptian reliefs at in Egypt. Basically, like for example, you go to the Ramesseum, the big funerary temple of Ramses II, and there's a relief in the back where he's attempting a siege of a Canaanite city, and you see the leader. He's holding his child and he's cutting its throat to sacrifice it. Yeah, charming. Yeah. The Egyptians talk about how the Canaanites would sacrifice their own children in order to prevent sieges from happening. And it was usually the king's son. Usually the king's son that got the axe. Oh yeah. It wasn't always charming to be the king's son. Yeah, so yeah. So yeah, we actually have a fair amount of evidence for this. So we absolutely know that the Canaanites did this. There's internal biblical evidence too, where it talks about a Tophet, and a Tophet is a place of child sacrifice. So when you see, for example, he made his the euphemism. There's a euphemism that we see in the Bible too. He made his son pass through the fire. That's essentially the kid was essentially sacrificed and turned into a burnt offering. Okay. So we have plenty of evidence of this. There's also in Carthage, which was, I believe, was a Phoenician city. A very, very large Tophet was excavated there in the 1970s. Big Tophet. Hundreds of little urns with the ashen remains of children. And that's the Tophet at Carthage. So Israel also had Tophets. So we know we know that child sacrifice happened in Canaan. We do know under some circumstances that it happened. It happened for economic purposes. For example, a child might be sacrificed for good crops or to save a town. So we do have a fair amount of evidence for this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate. I hope that answered your question. Next super chat is from Recreation for $5. Thank you very much. Honest question. If someone died being convinced full preterism was true, would they end up unsaved and in hell? By the way, I'm not full preterist. Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's hard to answer, honestly. Full preterism does deny the second coming of Jesus Christ. So, is that enough? Is that enough to put someone in full rebellion and so that they basically consign themselves to hell? I don't know. A lot of what we have to understand about the nature of the unsaved and of hell is that people are actively rejecting relationship with God. They're basically saying, yeah, I don't want anything to do with God or the God I'm being presented with. I'd rather have a different one. Okay. So, I'm not sure that full preterism is enough to make one unsaved. It's also not correct. Okay. I have serious reservations about full preterism. I'm not even a partial preterist, honestly, but full preterism I think is really off the table for somebody who really considers the scriptures to be true. But is that enough to consign one to basically say, hey, this person has consigned themselves to everlasting darkness. I don't know. Hard to say. Hard to say. And I'm lucky I don't have to make that decision. Yeah. I don't get in the business of saying who goes to heaven, who goes to hell. Now, in some cases it's dead obvious. Somebody who just says, they hate Christ, they don't want anything to do with God. Okay, God's going to respect those choices. God's going to respect those choices. Somebody just being wrong about eschatology, that's not likely to end up consigning yourself to hell in all likelihood. I can't say for certain, however, but that would be my thought on this. Is it's not a, even though it is a heretical position technically, because it denies part of the nature of Christ, I don't think it's sufficient to say that this is something that's so heretical that it'll send you to everlasting torment. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Kendall Friesen for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. He asks, what are your thoughts on the Aramaic portions of Daniel and their dating? I would need to look a lot more into this. I do need to do more work on Daniel. I haven't done a lot of work on Daniel. I do get a lot of frequent questions on Daniel, and I think that's part of it is because skeptics love attacking Daniel. Mostly because of its prophetic aspects. Now, there's nothing I've seen so far that's prima facie disqualifying of an early dating of Daniel. The Aramaic language goes at least back to 800 BC. I think it even goes back to 900. I think 900 BC is when we first see it used in like Assyria. So there is Aramaic being used, throughout. Then there's even one point in, I think it's the Book of Kings, where Sennacherib, does a siege of Jerusalem. He does a siege of Jerusalem, and his representative starts speaking to the people in Hebrew, and the king shouts out, "Hey, why are you speaking in Hebrew? Speak in the language we all understand," which happens to be Aramaic by that point. So, there's good evidence to already suggest that by the time of the Babylonian exile, everybody knew Aramaic already. So I don't see a lot of things that are really problematic about the Aramaic portions in Daniel as far as dating issue is concerned. But again, I'd have to look more into this to see what exactly is being said. As I said, nothing prima facie that I know of would disqualify an early dating of Daniel based upon, they say, what's in the Aramaic. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. And the MRB for $5. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Why do people say there is no gender distinction among angels when the ancient Near East had it? Why do scholars misapply Matthew 20:30, Mark 12:25, and Luke 20:5? Okay. Some of it comes from the words of Christ himself, which is that angels neither marry nor are given in marriage. Basically talking about people in the afterlife. And he says they're like the angels, neither marrying nor are given in marriage. Does that mean there's no gender distinction? Yes, the ancient Near East had gender distinction for its angels. You see this in late Bronze Age versions of angels, where they're basically females with wings, their arms as wings. But that's not to say that those are actually gender distinctions that are the essence of the angelic being itself. We have to understand that these representations are analogies that describe something greater. Nobody really thinks that an angel really is a woman with wings. At least not with arms as wings. These are spiritual beings. Fairly powerful spiritual beings, but they're spiritual beings nonetheless. Gender in it as a construct is a very material thing. So I'm not sure that even if you do find this in the ancient Near East, and you do find this in the ancient East, that it necessarily translates into something real in the heavenly realms. So it might be one of those things where it's trying to express a quality of gender and then applying that to something heavenly to try to communicate something. Now, let's look at your text here. This is exactly what you're trying to say. Those texts. So you've got Matthew 22, 30. Yeah, for in the resurrection they neither married nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. Now, this is talking about the resurrection of the dead. Will you be married in the afterlife? And the answer is, no, essentially. It's not saying there isn't gender, okay? And you are probably right that this is a misapplication of, say, this verse to try to conclude that there's no gender among, say, heavenly beings. At the same time, too, they don't procreate. So if it is gender, it's gender-like traits without the gender-like function. Okay? And remember, we have to remember that the function of gender is procreation. So in that respect, it's not a misapplication. So it's not saying human beings will procreate in heaven or that angels procreate in heaven. It just says that, they don't. For whatever reason. They might still retain their distinctions. In the case of human beings, we'll still have, say, our male and female distinctions. The ones that are, say, translates into a heavenly realm. But it's not going to be with the function of procreation. Okay? Let's look at your next verse here. Mark 12, 5. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. So it's the same thing. Luke 20, verse 35. Okay. And Jesus said to them, sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. For neither can they die any more, for they are like the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. Okay. So again, it's just a matter of you're not going to be in marital relations in heaven. You might still have your gender distinctions. Okay. In fact, you probably will have your gender distinctions, because you'll be resurrected as a man or a woman, with the body of a man or a woman. But it isn't for the purposes of procreation. It is for the purposes of identity. I'm not sure that angels still have that, necessarily will have that distinction of gender identity. The Bible's silent on this. Doesn't really tell us. And I think that's a very, very important thing here, is that we shouldn't extrapolate on where the Bible is silent. It just isn't something that seems to be all that important. We do hear, for example, when it talks about angels, in, say, where you have, say, angelic manifestations, they are often described as males. They are often described as males. But that could also be a very generic kind of thing as well. That, the biblical author had to choose a gender and chose the male gender. Like, for example, we don't have any reports of a female gendered angel in the scriptures. So I've got some issues here that I think we have to be careful not to read too far into the text. But at the same time, too, gender distinction possible, but we just don't know. But with that said, however, again, purpose is not going to be for procreation. And that seems to be clear revelation here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. I very much appreciate it. Okay, our next super chat is from Eric Ziegler for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Well, good evening to you too. In Judges 12:6, it says 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at the Jordan. Is this possible, mistranslated, or exaggerated? Ooh. Well, that does raise some questions. We'll just read that text real quick. That's Joshua. Judges 12. And let's talk about the Gileadites. Verse 5. And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan opposite Ephraim. And it happened when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he said no, they would say now Shibboleth. But he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it correctly. Then they seized him and slew him at the fords of the Jordan. Thus fell at that time 42,000 of Ephraim. Okay. I'm going to take a real quick look at the Hebrew just for a second. $40 and $2 LF. Okay. All right, it is using LF. Now, this leads us to some interesting possibilities here. Okay. Could it be an exaggeration? Yes, it could be an exaggeration. We do know that ancient texts often exaggerated numbers, especially when it came to victories or sizes of armies. We do find this in ancient texts. Is it mistranslated? Also possible. Now, the reason why Eleph can mean armies or groups or clans, so it can refer to a generic large company of people. So I think there is some possibility here. Is it possible that it was 42,000 in general? In total. It does seem a little high. That those numbers do seem a bit high, but again, we're talking about near the end of the time of the judges, so again, it's also possible. So it's hard to really say. We can't be sure. It could be any one of these. It could be possible. It could be mistranslated. And it could be, or it could be exaggerated. Any one of these is likely, or not likely, possible. It could be 42 clans. It could be 42,000. It could just be, say, 420 that was exaggerated to 42,000. Who knows? It's hard to say. But we're not always sure of how ancient people use numbers. It's a very, very tricky thing. So, that's probably the best answer I can give you right now on this one, is that we just don't know in this particular case. It could be any one of those three possibilities. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Our next super chat comes from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could the presence of diasporic Jews in Elephantine, Egypt during the 5th century BC explain why there are Egyptian loanwords in parts of the Torah? No, it can't. And we did touch on this in an earlier super chat, which is that the Egyptian loanwords preserve part of the endings that we find in the Egyptian loanwords as they were seen from, say, the Middle Bronze to the end of Dynasty 19. So, it's capturing, whenever a loanword is brought into a language, it takes a snapshot of it. It sort of freezes it in time. And that's what's going on in the Torah. It's taking pieces of the Egyptian language and just sort of taking that little snapshot of it and just giving us a little sort of insight that these are coming out of the late Bronze Age. So because words like Tabat preserve that final T, we know that was brought into, say, the Hebrew language at no later than the end of Dynasty 19. So that's a difference of, wow, almost 5-6 centuries. That's a long span of time. By the time you get to the 5th century BC, the Egyptian language has changed dramatically. Okay? It's gone through some incredible transitions at that point. It goes through a complete structural change. It goes through a lot of vocabulary changes so that, extra vowels are added. There's a lot of things that change in the Egyptian language by that point in time, by the 5th century BC. So I don't think it's a good explanation for Egyptian loanwords in the Torah. The better explanation is that, these people had affinity with Egypt. These people were living in Egypt. These people were picking up vocabulary from the Ramesside period and the New Kingdom, and they were incorporating it into their language. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Our next super chat is from Mouthwash for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Greek philosophers inspired? Socrates had a daemon which followed him throughout his life. Plato explicitly says a truly righteous man would be crucified. New Testament quotes Epimenides as a prophet of Christ. Oh. Well. Well, Epimenides is not quoted as a prophet of Christ, okay? He is quoted, and he's quoted as a source of truth, but he's not quoted as a prophet, so we got to be a little careful there. Plato saying a truly righteous man would be crucified. Well, you could come up with that on your own. As far as Socrates had a demon which followed him throughout his life, there is some suggestion that was true. But what we mean by demon here is not what, say, Christian writers mean by demon. A daemon is a helper, a spirit that does tasks. It's not necessarily a spirit of darkness. Okay, so we have to be careful here. We don't know exactly what Socrates meant by that. We don't know if that was Plato putting words in Socrates' mouth, because we only have Socrates' writings through his students. And he actually only had 2 students that did writing. Plato was one of them. I don't remember who the other one was off the top of my head. But, so we've got to be very careful here. So, but they're not inspired. They're not inspired texts. They're not inspired writers. But they are used. They are used by the New Testament writers to drive home certain points of truth. You know, like the old saying goes, even a broken clock is right twice a day. You know, you're not going to get everything right here. Not as a Greek philosopher. But they didn't get everything wrong either. So, I want to express a little caution here. They're definitely not prophets. They're definitely not inspired. But they do have elements of truth. And frankly, let's see here. Does it say Titus 2? Let's take a look at that, because I was not aware it called Epimenides explicitly a prophet. Just take a look at that. I know Epimenides, Titus 1:12. I want to take a look at that, because... okay. The wording here is very tricky. Okay. Mouthwash brings up that Titus 1:2 explicitly says Epimenides is a prophet. It says a prophet of their own. That's very different. Okay. He's basically saying they consider him a prophet. Not that the New Testament writer. This is their words, not the writer's words. Okay? Very, very, very fine line there. So, it's not, the text is not saying he's a prophet. The text is saying that they consider him a prophet. It's the words in their mouth. And the they here is... Crete. Yeah. So, gotta be very careful here. Gotta make sure that you're reading the whole text, and you have to read it, you know, as it purports itself. So, again, very careful. You've got to be always very careful when you read it, that you don't sort of gloss over something here that's not intended by the text. Okay? So, so with that said, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. But no, these are not inspired. They're not prophets. They are writers within their own culture. And there is an attempt here to try to communicate some truths through cultural context. Essentially, that's what's going on here. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Switch it up here. Left off. Mechatanky Stalinus for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here tonight. No question. Thanks for taking lots of my non-super chats. Well, you're most welcome. We do try to take as many as we can. It's just one of those things that it's just takes us a while to oftentimes to get through the super chats. but we do try to make a good faith effort to answer as many non-super chats as we can. And the reason is because we're doing this as a public service. This is a ministry for us. We do very much appreciate the financial support. We need it. You keep food on our tables, essentially. You keep us fed. Yeah, you keep the power running and the internet service going. We really, really appreciate the financial support. So, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. We so very much appreciate it. Okay, our next super chat is from Mouthwash again for $5. Thank you very much for super chat. You cite Pharaoh's proximity as evidence Pre-Ramses was capital, but couldn't the royal court move around between cities with multiple residences? Okay. Well, the whole royal court didn't move. Sometimes Pharaoh would go from city to city. It did happen sometimes. But we have to recognize, too, that the plagues of Egypt took place over several months. At least from the beginning of the inundation cycle to the barley harvest. That's about 6 months. So those plagues took place over a half year. He's not going to be staying at a little residence. And frankly, we have to understand that these palaces weren't designed to house the entire royal court. They were essentially temporary stays for the pharaoh, but more importantly, they were administrative buildings for the local official. Like, for example, the palace at Avaris was not the royal. It was technically a royal palace, but what it really was it was the residence for the vizier of Lower Egypt. So that's where the vizier of Lower Egypt stayed, was at Avaris, in that royal residence there. Okay, and there were royal palaces all over Egypt. Most of them were not that big. Okay? Not enough to hold the entire court. Like, for example, we compare this to, say, the palace of Amenhotep III at Thebes. That thing was massive. That's a big palace. None of the palaces we find at Avaris were even remotely the size of what we find at Thebes. Not even close. Because the fact is that royal palace at Thebes housed not only the king, but his harem and his children, his bodyguards. He had a lot of them. There was a royal guard that protected the whole royal family. So, that's a lot of people to house. You had staff there, just like in Buckingham Palace. It isn't just the king and queen and the royal children staying there. You also had the servants. A small royal palace at Avaris was not big enough to house everybody. And you also had to have the supporting infrastructure too for the administrators who didn't live at the palace but had to frequently visited. Diplomats, occasional priests. These are people who needed access to the king, and they were one of those things that this is one of those things where even when the king went on procession to the temples of Egypt, which he did on occasion, he would go occasionally from one end of Egypt to the other in a royal procession, where he visited temples and performed ceremonies. He didn't do this very often, though. He would stay at those royal residences, but he wouldn't stay there very long. He would move on to the next town after very short order. And that's because it wasn't designed for long-term processes of state. It was really administrative. Most of those palaces were really administrative buildings. That's what they functioned most of the time of the year. So Moses as he was, say, the daughter of the vizier, son of the daughter of the vizier, sorry, um, he would have grown up at the royal palace at Avaris, but he never went to the royal palace at Thebes, where the king was. So the royal court didn't move around. It didn't move around. It stayed in one place. It stayed in its where the imperial capital was, where the main palace was. So that's where the royal court stayed most of the time. The yeah, the DMV doesn't move. Yeah, because if you got I mean, we have to understand that royal harems were large. These were not small groups of individuals. Ramses II, for example, had was it something like 100 wives and 52 children? It's just a crazy amount of people that would have been involved, picking up and moving the entire court. Just wouldn't have been practical to move the entire royal court, not for something that would be temporary. And they left those people at home to raise children, to make sure they were secure, protected. So it's not feasible. It's not feasible to think that the royal court moved. And we do know that Moses was in Goshen. He was at the city of Avaris. That's where he was during the time of the Passover. And Pharaoh had to have been in very close proximity, because the Passover occurs at midnight. Pharaoh sends out a message, and it makes it to Moses before dawn. That's a 6-hour window that Pharaoh has to be near to, him and his child. Because Pharaoh's with his kid. He's with his kid when the Passover takes place. The firstborn son. So, there's a propinquity here that limits how far he could have been away. And then the Passover is the very next morning. Or sorry, not the Passover. The Exodus begins the very next morning. They leave the next morning. So there isn't much difference. There's not much time for these events to take place. And Moses is constantly having this interaction with Pharaoh. He's going to Pharaoh, coming back to the elders. Pharaoh's talking to the taskmasters. Taskmasters talk to the elders. Beat up some more Israelites. There's a propinquity here. There's a propinquity, and it's there's a pattern here. But yeah, I mean that's really what they did. Denied them the straw, then beat them up when they couldn't make enough beat the brick quota. That's Pharaoh had to have some idea of what was going on, and likewise, there had to be this sort of very, very fast communication. And Pharaoh is not going to hang around a small, local palace for half a year. It just isn't going to happen. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, our next super chat is from Mouthwash for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Have you personally witnessed miracles or healings? No, I haven't actually, to be very honest. I've never witnessed a healing, and I've never witnessed a miracle. Now, I believe that, miracles are possible. I believe that healing is possible. Even miraculous healing is possible. I have heard, I've seen people who have claimed to have recovered from some very, very serious illnesses. but I have not witnessed it personally. So, I it's just not something I've ever been a party to seeing. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. And we got who else? Mouthwash again for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. How are Canadians mooring compared to other countries? Well, we are a Commonwealth nation. Okay. The Queen is, or was, Queen of not only Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also Queen of Canada. And as a Commonwealth nation, we do recognize the Queen as the head of state. She's the head of state, not the head of government, head of state. So, she doesn't have any real power in Canada, but she does have certain rights in Canada that other Canadians don't have. Like, she can travel in and out without a passport. She doesn't need to really make too many arrangements in advance to come here. She can act as Governor General should she decide to. She has never decided that. No monarch since the 1940s has actually decided to abrogate the role of the Governor General of Canada, but she could do that. She still has that power. Yeah, well, the king does. Yeah. So that's gonna be hard. That's gonna be hard to get used to calling it the king instead of the queen, because it's been 70 years. I remember when I was a kid. We all got these little commemorative medallions for the Queen's Silver Jubilee. And I remember that, and that actually made quite an impact on me. I still wish I had it, but yeah, I remember that. I remember getting one of those silver medallions for the Queen's Jubilee, and so there's a whole lot of very, very interesting things there that the way Canadians are reacting to it. Some Canadians don't care. Some Canadians are really taking this hard. So it depends. There are going to be government functions to mourn the loss of the Queen. I know they've set up a mourning registry that Canadians can go and sign if they wish. So there's a lot there that's happening because of this, and there's going to be a lot of transitions too. Several official documents are going to be changed, and that's going to have a noticeable impact. Heraldry, yeah, heraldry is going to change. What about the heraldry exactly? But yes, like for example, if you go to King Charles III's Wikipedia page, it has his coat of arms on it. Well, they have something on there called a coat of arms called a label, which is this white strip with 3 sort of tabs on them. And that's supposed to be removed as soon as the old monarch falls, or, is deceased, and the new monarch takes the throne. Well, that hasn't been updated yet. So I still noticed that they still had the labels on all his coat of arms. And that's going to change. His coat of arms will have those labels removed eventually. There's also the fact that all our official our citizenship oaths are going to change. They're not going to no longer be done, and you no longer are going to swear allegiance to the Queen, but to the King now. And those are official documents, because you get a certificate with the oath on it. You're also going to see, like, for example, official correspondence from, say, Governor General. What's it called now? Portraits are going to change. There's going to be a lot of upheaval in government offices. Where the name of the sovereign is still invoked, still on display. So yeah, this is a transition time. It's very much a transition time. It's not something that's not going to go unnoticed, because it's in some ways affects every one of us if you live in a Commonwealth country. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Camel Leopard for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. And Shabbat Shalom to you too. Question is too long is down below. Okay. Let's see here. Most people use Peter's vision in Acts 10 as evidence for Christians not having to follow kosher dietary laws. But the point of the vision, as explained by Peter in Acts 2, seems to be that the unclean animals represented the Gentiles. Or that question? Doesn't look like it. Okay. So it looks like, or the question is, regarding that vision as evidence for Christians not having to follow kosher dietary laws. Okay. Now, the whole matter of the kosher dietary laws is that's part of the ceremonial law. We didn't actually need this vision to stop following kosher laws. These kosher laws were given specifically to the Israelites as part of, say, the sacrificial system to keep the covenant. Okay. Now, do I think that do I keep the kosher laws myself? No, I don't. I don't keep the kosher laws myself. I like my bacon. I like my shrimp. I like crab. All those yummy things from the ocean I like. I do like sausage. I do like pork chops. I do like bacon. Okay? I'm going to have a very hard time giving up bacon, honestly. Bacon wrapped shrimp? Oh yeah, I'm all over that. But as far as Christians following the kosher laws, we have other parts where Paul basically tells new Christians, hey, if you eat kosher, great, fantastic. If someone doesn't eat kosher, they're still a brother. Don't judge them. This comes down to more of the weaker brother thing than it does anything else. There's some people, you don't want to lodge your freedom over somebody who might is keeping kosher because they really feel convicted to do so. At the same time, too, the guy who's keeping kosher isn't to judge the person who doesn't keep kosher. Okay? So it boils down to freedom in Christ, really. You can keep kosher if you want to. You don't have to keep kosher, though. It doesn't have anything to do with Peter's vision, though. Ultimately, it has to do more with freedom in Christ, really. That we are no longer under the strictures of the sacrificial system. The sacrificial system has been fulfilled in Christ. And because it's fulfilled in Christ, we have now freedom in Christ. And that freedom includes wearing mixed fabrics, eating shrimp with bacon. This is one of those things that is different with the new covenant. It's not the old covenant anymore. The old covenant, you had to keep the sacrificial system, put a covering over sin so that you could carry on business with God. You don't have to do that anymore because you don't have to put the covering over the sin. The sin has been taken away. Christ's blood paid for that sin, removed it entirely. So, oh boy. Yeah, they probably will. Cosmologium wrote, "You're going to have the Judaizers calling you a blasphemer." Yeah, they might. What do I care? I'm still going to eat my bacon. But that's really the justification for it. It doesn't come from Peter's vision. Peter's vision is, and you rightly discerned here that Peter's vision is to show that, and it's using these unclean foods as as symbols of the Gentiles. And God repeats that vision 3 times to try to get through to Peter. Peter's a good Jew. He's still keeping kosher laws. And he's not eating with people who don't follow the kosher laws. God goes, break and eat. Eat with your fellow Gentiles. Eat with your fellow Gentiles. The Gentiles who are in Christ. And he has to repeat this 3 times. And this is like, this is just a repeat of God saying to Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. This is these triplicate these times when you have to get through to Peter 3 times is sort of to keep reminding him about his betrayal. He's forgiven of the betrayal where he denies Christ 3 times, but Peter's stubborn and he doesn't always listen. So these things have to be sometimes done in triplicate to get through the guy. And, this is why also, Peter ultimately gives up the kosher laws, is so he can have fellowship with the Gentiles. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Mr. Phil Fox, long time no see. Good to see you here tonight. Wow. Thank you very much for that very generous super chat of $20. Really appreciate it. Love and prayers. And he says, love and prayers, brother. Well, love and prayers to you too. Wow, excited to have you here tonight. Amazing. I hope you're doing well. I haven't heard from you in a long time, so I hope everything is well. It's amazing to see you here tonight. Very much appreciate you, just dropping in. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Wonderful to see you. Absolutely wonderful to see you here. Okay. We have Cosmologium for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did the Hyksos ever occupy or control Tanis? No, they didn't. And there's a reason. They occupied the area of Tanis, but Tanis was never a city at that time of the Hyksos. Okay? So, Tanis wasn't started as a city until Dynasty 21. So, that is at the beginning of the Third Intermediate Period. So, essentially, the Hyksos that's your Dynasty 15. Now, maybe you can include, elements of Dynasty 14 in there too, but really Dynasty 15, that's your Hyksos dynasty. Okay? So the Hyksos controlled the whole Nile Delta and up the river as far as Thebes. And that was sort of the extent of their territory. Now, Tanis would be, what would be then called the Field of Tanis, would be in that sort of area of the Nile Valley, just slightly north of Pi Ramses. Okay, but it was not a city. It wasn't even a town. It was nothing at that point. So it was just a field. It was a field on a Gezira. So basically a mound. It's a mound that's formed by a river. Okay, Gezira. Um, so Tanis was really nothing but a sort of a field, grassy field. It's in the delta, so it's in a marshy area. You go there today. You go to Tanis today. It's still damp. The ground is still damp. The ground is still sort of penetrated by water. So, yeah, there wasn't really anything there to control, but they had control of the area. So, they did, but they never occupied it. They never really they didn't build it. Tanis will be built after essentially Ramses is no longer viable as a city because the river moves. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Okay. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. Oh, you'll love my review on Petrovich next week. Oh boy. Watch the whole thing, and oh boy, it's going to be a doozy. Make sure you've got your scotch for it, rolling on the floor laughing. Oh boy. I did see the rest of your review of the Ebel amulet. Really enjoyed that. Actually, I was listening to it this morning as I was at work. As I said, I'm actually very much enjoying your reviews. I'm actually very, very much enjoying them. I do very much like your reaction videos. So, very much I'm liking them. So, I can't wait to see what you've done with Petrovich. So that should be very interesting. So, and I will make sure if I'm at home and I'm watching it at home, I'll make sure I'll have some scotch handy. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's good to hear you're making more of those reviews. Should be very interesting. And I would recommend anyone who's watching this to also subscribe to Linguist Ammo's channel. It's a small channel, but he's producing some really good content. So, and I love recommending channels that have good content. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Now, I have to squint here. Alexer929 for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. I lean towards a symbolic view of 7 days in Genesis 1. Okay. Do you know if the 7-day structure was a literary device in ancient times? I've heard that it may have been used in Babylon. Yes. Yes, I am. We do find it as a literary device in, say, certain myths in Egypt. The epigomenal days, where you have this you have in the Egyptian calendar 12 months of 30 days. But that gives you 360 days. Extra 5 days for the remainder of the year was a festival, and each day was said to give birth to a different god. So those last 5 days were devoted to the birth of specific gods. And it's using the term day there as a way of, say, structuring the creation of deity in Egypt. Okay, so in that respect, that is used in a more symbolic way. I'm not aware of the literary device being used in, say, Babylon, but I don't always. I'm not as well read up on my Babylonian mythology as I probably should be. It's been a long time since I've looked at it. Let me just say it. I've read it all. I just don't remember it, so I need to reread it. There's a lot of things I need to reread because one of the things is the more stuff you get into your head, the more you forget. Your brain has a very, very good and efficient garbage collection system. Oh, you don't need that memory anymore. Atrahasis, you don't need that. Gilgamesh, you haven't used that in a long time. Just throw it out. Iliad, you read that 30 years ago. So it's like, yeah, okay. Now, what happened in that story again? I know I read it. Okay, so I can't really answer that question for Babylon. Okay, as I said, you do encounter it sometimes in Egyptian mythology, where a day is used in a symbolic manner, but it's also so it does happen. Whether or not the 7 days in Genesis, one is symbolic. I don't have an opinion on one day way or the other, really. It is possible, very possible, because there is a framework there that is being used, where you have 3 days to create, the first 3 days to create the space, the next 3 days to fill the space, and the seventh day to rest away from it. So there is a definite framework structure there that to Genesis 1 that does seem to lean, that suggests strongly that these are being used in, say, a poetic, symbolic kind of way. So that's about as far as I can take that at the moment. As I say, I'm not decided on this issue. I don't have an opinion one way or the other whether these are actually symbolic or literal days. But I do think there's definitely some literary devices happening. There's definitely some literary devices. It is basically recapitulating the structures of temples and temple rituals. So there is those particular aspects going on here. So anyway, I hope that helped answer the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, David Martin for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is making distinctions in the Torah like ceremonial, moral, and judicial? I think you mean judicial law, ceremonial law, moral law, judicial law. Appreciate within a new covenant context, or is there another way? Well, I think there is. I think making those distinctions is actually quite useful. Okay? Because there's things in the ceremonial law that, frankly, just aren't going to be practiced anymore because there's no temple or tabernacle. Okay? The whole restriction of ritually bathing, isn't going to really apply anymore before entering a temple because there's no more temple. The whole prohibition of killing a bull before bringing the meat to the temple is also not going to apply. The moral law is still going to apply. Thou shalt not murder. That's still pretty sensible moral guidance. Okay? Judicial law? Probably not so much. And that's because we have civil laws in each of our respective countries today that sort of fill that role. So, the judicial law was really for the theocratic state of Israel. Okay. Moral law will still apply to us because it's a teacher that does guide us to righteousness. And the ceremonial law, again, does not apply because no longer applies in the same way because we no longer have the sacrificial system. Unless they rebuild a temple, then they might bring that back. But that's not likely to affect, say, a lot of people within a new covenant context. So I do think there's use. I do think there's value in making those distinctions. Definitely. Because otherwise, if you don't make those distinctions, certain things get confused quickly. Like, for example, people do mistake at that point then the ceremonial law for, say, as a moral imperative. Like eating shrimp. Well, eating shrimp is not a sin. It really is only useful within the ceremonial law. But if you turn it into the moral law, then you are, say, confusing certain aspects or intentions of the law. Likewise, even the judicial law is meant to be more, say, case law than it is to be prescriptive. Now, they did use the judicial law sometimes in a prescriptive manner, but it's also true that the judicial law was ultimately left up to this discretion of the judges. Whereas the judges would probably have no influence on, say, a transgression of the ceremonial law. That was provided primarily, the administration of the ceremonial law was provided primarily by, say, priests and Levites. So again, I think these are very, very useful categories. I think they're just to keep things straight, so you're not confusing categories, confusing various aspects of the law. These are actually really good distinctions to have. So anyway, I hope this helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Sentinel Apologetics for $10 Australian. Good to see you here tonight, Rob. Daddy Falk. A 2022 JBL article by Van Dyke argued on Exodus 32:4 that it should be read, Aaron received from their hands, he designed it with a rush pen, and he made it into a cast metal calf. Thoughts? Thoughts is, let's look this up. What it says. Look at this. 32 or okay. This is NASB here. And I'll start verse 3. Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf and said, This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Okay. Aaron received from their hands. Okay, I don't have any problem with that per se. He designed it with a rush pen. Ah. Yeah, that's going to be kind of it does seem to be, the word here is karet, which is a kind of stylus. Yeah, I don't think rush pin is a good translation because you're really here manipulating gold. Really manipulating gold. If you're manipulating gold, this is what's called in jewelry manufacture cold forming. Okay? He's basically taking the earrings, twisting them together, compacting them, and sort of beating them into shape. Hmm? Yeah, it's kind of like wire wrap jewelry, honestly. This is kind of like a little bit like wire wrap. Okay? And the term here, and made it into a cast metal calf. Yeah, I don't know if cast metal is quite the right image here. The thing is that the term here for molten, masaka, cannot just mean, say, cast. It can also mean just metal or image, as in an image of a calf. So we do know that they did have limited lost metal casting, but they really didn't have the technology to do that on a big scale. Okay? Really, what was probably more going on here, because when we look at, say, metalworking technology of the late Bronze Age, they didn't have investment. Okay, they didn't have investment. Now, what is investment? Investment is a kind of special plaster with a material in there that resists high heat. Okay? And basically, with lost wax casting, you make a positive, you put the investment around it, you burn out the wax, and then you can pour metal in, and that would make your cast metal shape. The problem is that the Egyptians didn't have that technology. That technology had not been invented yet. Okay? So when you are going to do casting, you do have to do it in such a way that it holds, whatever your mold is going to hold its shape. As far as I know, the sand in the Sinai isn't appropriate for even sand casting. Even if you had something that you could, say, easily melt out the positive. So when we look at, say, for example, statue making in Egypt, okay, most of it was really, really small. It was either really small and it was cold formed. So basically, they would start off with, say, an ingot, and then sort of hammer it and work it into shape. Or if it's a larger item, they carved it out of wood and then, say, covered it with gold foil. So that was a typical manufacturing technique for idols in Egypt. It was either gold overlay for large ones or little tiny pieces or little tiny statues for, say, the idols that you put in, like, sacred barks. So as long as he took those earrings, melted it down perhaps into an ingot, and then cold formed it with a stylus, he could have easily have made the golden calf. But again, this is one of those things that you have to take in context with the technology of the time. So I don't necessarily think that this is a cast metal calf. It does seem to be more along the lines of this is a cold formed calf that he worked with a bronze graver, basically a bronze tool that can be used to push and pull the metal to sort of eventually, like kind of like taking a piece of wax and just molding it in shape, or a piece of clay with a clay modeling tool. So it's going to look more like that as far as its process of how it's being made. So I have my doubts here about his, at least the latter half of his translation. I don't think you're going to be able to move metal around with a rush pen. Honestly, it's just not strong enough. Just not strong enough. If it was at least wood, maybe, but rushes, no, no. Rushes don't have the strength to, move metal, and I don't think the word even here designed is actually, you know, even that's not a particularly good translation here. So, yeah, I've got some doubts here. I've got some doubts about the translation. It probably isn't the worst translation, honestly, but it's also probably not the best either. I wish, a little more of archaeometallurgy would have been, sort of exercised here as they did this. So anyway, there's my thoughts on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Not much more I can say other than it just doesn't seem to be coherent with the actual metalworking of the period. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Yeah, it was an interesting question. Very interesting question. Okay, let's see what's next here. Okay. JPP, or sorry, JJP for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Which languages do you know / speak? Can you also give us the best language learning tips? Also, scholarly versus non-scholarly. Ah, yes. I don't speak any language well. That includes English. Uh, I do read several languages, though. Okay. I do read French. I do read smattering of German. I read Japanese. Ancient languages, 4 dialects of Egyptian, Hebrew, Greek, Koine Greek, and Biblical Hebrew, that is. Akkadian, Moabite. I know a little bit of Ugaritic and a little bit of Hittite, too. I think that covers it. Oh, I lost track. Oh, and a tiny amount of Ukrainian. Slava Ukraini. So, there you go. Now, my best language learning trip, I can just say this. Use it. Yeah, use it. For me, language learning has always been hard. It's not an easy pursuit for me. I know there are people who are particularly gifted at languages. I'm not one of them. Okay? Every language I've ever learned has been the result of blood, sweat, and okay. I do not. I just, for me, it just doesn't stick easily. And part of it is that I don't have good memory retention, and you do need to be able to retain uh, the vocabulary, the syntax structure, the declensions, those aspects somehow in your brain, be able to use them. But it also kind of works the opposite way too, which is the more you use it, the easier it is for you to retain. Okay? So that's probably my best suggestion, is to keep using whatever language you do. If it's a language that you read, like Hebrew, read it out loud. Read it so you're constantly reading it out loud and hearing it. Expose yourself to some media. In a good portion of the Japanese I know I sort of picked up watching anime and reading Japanese comic books. So, if you use this, if you use it as a practical language, you tend to retain it a lot more. And you tend to learn it faster because you're doing it in a particular context. So, those are probably my best language tips. Is use it as frequently as you can, expose yourself to lots of media, whatever that language is. So, read poetry? Yeah, you can read poetry, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Next super chat is from Gizmo SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What does archaeology tell us about the conditions in the late 13th century BC Canaan? Is there evidence of deurbanization and widespread decline? Hmm. Hmm. Ah, geez. Think about that. Okay, yeah. Actually, a fair bit. Fair bit, actually. What does the archaeology tell us about the conditions in late 13th century BC Canaan? We do know at this point that the city-states in Canaan were in decline. Most of the city-states in Canaan were having a hard time defending their own walls at this point. Had a hard time defending their lands. 13th century BC Canaan was under pressure. Okay, it was under pressure from foreign invading groups. You had Canaan being divvied up essentially between various groups. Like on the coastal plain, the Philistines were moving in. They were moving in, and they were taking over the Canaanite cities of the coastal plain. In the northeast of the country, in the Heshbon and the Arnon, those areas were being overrun by the Amorites. You had Hurrians, who were the remnants of the Mitanni Empire, who are sojourning in the region. And then you had the Israelites coming in across from the east, from Jordan, and they're coming in and essentially driving out the Amorites. Okay. So in the 13th century, you have these various groups, that are sort of taking advantage of the Bronze Age collapse and are sort of piecemeal taking apart Canaan. Now, the Amorites will eventually be completely driven out, and so too will the Hurrians for the most part. What will remain, though, is that long-standing sort of agricultural competition between the Philistines and the Israelites. Now, the second part of your question, is there evidence of deurbanization and widespread decline? There is some. There is some, definitely. The height of Canaanite civilization seems to be in the 15th, even around the 15th century, during the end of the Middle Bronze period. That seems to be the height of sort of Middle Bronze Canaanite civilization. After that, you starting to see very much decline starts to set in, especially during, say, the 14th century, the 15th and 14th, the later 15th, early 14th century. You start seeing some incredible decline going on. such that that these little city states are starting to squabble against each other for resources. So it is there. It's definitely there, and we do see that in the late 13th century, when the Israelites are starting to move on in, that we start to see new settlements spring up all over Canaan at that point. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Gizgo SBOL for $5 again. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Do you have a theory on the geographic origin of Proto-Afro-Asiatic? Oh. No, I don't. um, also, do you believe Abraham spoke an East or West Semitic language? I think he spoke an East Semitic language, honestly. Because he's coming out of Urkesh in northern Mesopotamia. They're speaking that part of the area is speaking East Semitic. Now, we have to kind of understand that at this time, there isn't that much difference between East and West Semitic. Very little difference. So the fact he spoke East Semitic, and that's what we have the most evidence for. We have actually very little evidence of West Semitic languages at the time of Abraham. So we don't even know if how far divergent West Semitic would be at that point. We do know that the Amorites are going to, they're going to probably more adopt that West Semitic dialect. But at that point, there isn't that much. The differences between East and Semitic are not that huge yet. That'll change. That'll change dramatically. As sort of the West Semitic dialects sort of start splintering off into these individual Semitic languages, like Moabite, like Ugaritic, like Hebrew. Then you'll start seeing some very important differences in, say, syntax and in structure, and even in the verbs from East to West Semitic at that point. But at the time of Abraham, it's a lot less pronounced. So he could probably still practice this, still use his language in, say northern Syria and into Canaan, because it would have been recognizable enough that he could get by with it. So I don't have an answer to your first question, because I've never really thought about the geographic origin of Proto-Afro-Asiatic, but I have thought about, say, the differences between East and West Semitic, especially during the time of Abraham. So that's my answer to the questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Next super chat is from JJP for $10. Thank you again for this super chat. Very much appreciated. Double question. Ooh. Is there any evidence beyond the level of Aristeas that Ptolemy II freed 120 Jews as related to by Josephus in Antiquities? No, not really. Josephus cites letter of Aristeas. What is your view of this work? Depends what side of the bed I get out of. I'm I usually sort of drift towards that the letter of Aristeas was written sort of after the fact to sort of legitimize the Septuagint. I'm not saying, but at the same time too, I'm not saying it's a later forgery. What I am saying though is that there are claims in that letter that may not be exactly what it appears. And some of those claims might include the freeing of 120,000 Jews. Here's the problem with Josephus. Josephus does embellish things. He embellishes things a lot. Especially when it's some stuff that involves ancient stuff like texts and Manetho, for example. Josephus adds certain things to Manetho that I don't think are good, are not a true representation of history. So, do I think he tampered with the letter of Aristeas? Could be. It's possible. I wouldn't put it past him. I would definitely not put past Josephus to tamper with a letter, a real, genuine letter of Aristeas. Let's just say I don't always trust Josephus. Okay? And I think I've got a lot of good reasons to mistrust Josephus when it comes to events of older antiquity. Now, when he's talking about the events that are less than 200 years, from his time, yeah, he's absolutely great, absolutely fantastic. But when it comes to ancient records, ancient sources, he just tinkers with them. He just does this, and it just drives me nuts. Because you would like credible sources. Every historian wants credible sources. But you just can't trust him on older stuff. The stuff he did to Manetho was just, he's inserting the Exodus into Manetho. Trying to make the claim that, well, hey, Manetho, said that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was Amenhotep II. No, Manetho didn't say this. And we've got enough extra material from Manetho to more or less prove this. So, I have some real difficulties believing everything we get from Josephus on a prima facie basis. So, I think there really was a letter of Aristeas. I don't think it necessarily includes everything that Josephus says it does. So that's my opinion on the letter of Aristeas. I think there's probably an original document there. What it really contained, the original, I cannot be sure. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered the question. Okay, the next one is from Destiny Knight 77 for $19.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right. And he says, I really loved your explanation of clan lifespans a few weeks ago. Well, thank you very much. Does reading also apply to Noah? Yeah, probably does. He stated as being 500 and when having his 3 sons, then 600 when he and his son's family board the ark. Yeah. I do think this applies also to Noah. Now, is it the Noah at the end, or is it the Noah at the beginning? It's hard to say. But I do think this also applies to Noah. And I think we have to be, again, very, very careful here about how we look at some of these ages and texts here. Like, for example, we do find, like Ephraim. We know Ephraim died in Egypt. Yet in 1 Chronicles chapter 6, he shows up again, or is it 6 or 7? One of those two. He shows up again in Canaan, his sons die, and Ephraim mourns for his sons. Well, it's not the same Ephraim. 2 different Ephraims. It's the Ephraim, the later Ephraim that's in Canaan, is the clan chief. He's the clan chief. He's the continuation of that clan of Ephraim. He's not the original Ephraim. The same applies to Korah. Korah, he's the son of Kohath, son of Levi. He should be dead. He'd be like 300 years old by the time he shows up at the Korah rebellion in the book of Exodus. Okay? It's not the same Korah. A different Korah. It's the Korah that continues on with the clan of Korah. Yeah, and we do know that that clans can live and maintain continuity of name for a really, really long time. You have the clan MacDonald. They've been around for 900 years. They're still around. They still have a hereditary clan chief. This is just something about clan societies, is they tend to perpetuate clan chiefs, often using the name of the progenitor. So this is very, very common. Very common. So then when we look at something like the Noah narrative, we also have to say, okay, here's this potentially this long family, running clan, who is then, having 3 sons, who then also start their own clans and tribes. So that's you're seeing here with Noah, the clan from the old world, from the antediluvian world, who boards the ark, who emerges after the flood, and then you have his sons with the 3 new clans. So that's what's happening here with the Noah narrative. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. And I do think it definitely applies here also. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. I'll even throw in one more example of a clan that's often overlooked here, which is the relationship even between, say, Terah and Abraham. We're told that Abraham, the sons of Terah, were Abraham, Haran, and Nahor. And we figure out from Acts 7, and it's really in the Hebrew structure as well, with the consecutive of in at the beginning of Genesis chapter 12, that Abraham is 75 when after he leaves upon the death of Terah. Well, you figure that out. Terah must have been 140 when Abraham was born. Okay. Now, if he was just the father of Abraham, why does Abraham then say later on in the text, when he's given the promise of his son, what man can conceive of a son at age 100? Well, if his father was 140 when he conceived Abraham, why is this unusual? This should be just business as usual. Unless Terah is not his father, but potentially his grandfather or great-grandfather. And that's what we have to keep in mind here, is that these relationships are not exactly using the same sort of terminology that we do. Like, for example, we make the distinction between a grandfather and a father. Ancient Hebrews, ancient Israelites didn't make this distinction. They just called their grandfather a father and their great-grandfather a father. Likewise, grandfather called his grandchildren sons and daughters, respectively. Because if you have a father, and his father is also your father, that's the way sort of familial relationships worked in ancient Israel. It's a fascinating subject, and once you start looking at clans, the clan structure in the Bible, you'll just see it. You just see it everywhere. It's all through the Old Testament. and it just makes a whole lot of sense of a whole lot of difficult passages. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. And now we got Gizbo SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, someplace Abraham in the year 3 period, reign of Ernamu or Amorsin, besides the Elamite issue, what are some major problems with this position? Okay. Trying to figure out exactly what the question is here. I think there's some issues here with the Earth 3 period in general, assigning that to Abraham. And I think part of it is the dating of this. Just go look up. Yeah. Earth 3 is the 21st century BC. I think that's an issue. And I think part of the reason it is such an issue is because we've got, with for example, being able to correlate now Terra of Urkesh with what we find in the Mari letters, we can pretty much sort of narrow down Abraham to the 18th century BC. Now, this is actually, I'm not the first person to come up with that dating, by the way. Kenneth Kitchen also dated it to the Abraham to the 18th century BC as well. So that's not new dating. So I think the Earth 3 period is way too old for Abraham. We also don't have, and you did already bring up the Elamite issue, where we don't actually have any Elamite kings of that period that have names that are similar to Chedorlaomer that we find in Genesis 15. So I think there's some real issues. I think there's some real issues with trying to place Abraham in Earth 3. I know people still try this. I don't think it works. I think it's much stronger to place Abraham in say in that as I said, the late 18th century BC, contemporary with Hammurabi and the last kings of Mari, where you sort of have those back and forth between, say, the Elamites and the kings of Mari. So I think that makes much more sense to even the Abraham narrative. Where is he coming from? Where is he going? Does he have to cross a river to get where he's going next? Is he still in Mesopotamia? That sort of thing. So I just think it's a stronger fit. Just think it's a stronger fit to place him in Urkesh rather than in Ur of the Chaldees, because there is at best retrojection, but also possible anachronism, and you can easily reconstruct Urkesh from the biblical text just on the basis of the consonants. So I think that there's as I said, I think the biggest problem here is the chronological problem. That's a big problem. But I also think too that the correlations that we have for Abraham and for Terah just sort of kind of prohibited at this point. It also would be a very problem too when you try to fit Abraham's successors in, like Joseph. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Joseph, we can definitely slot him in say the 1650s. That's going to be an issue. if we date Abraham to much older than, say, the 18th century. That's gonna be a problem. Be a problem. So anyway, I think that's the issues involved. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. And super chat is by Bruce Hardy for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. How often were Assyria and Egypt at war during the Commonwealth of Israel? Ooh, good question. Being in a zone between the two massive empires sounds difficult. Yes. Now, Assyria and Egypt are going to... Assyria is never going to take over all of Israel. They never completely capture the Judean foothills. The attempt to do so by Sennacherib was a failure. Assyria is going to go down the coastal plain. You know, they're going to take out they're going to capture the Philistine cities. They're going to dominate the Philistines in the coastal plain. And they are going to do at least two campaigns into Egypt. One under Esarhaddon, one under Ashurbanipal, the first. So they are going to be, Egypt is going to be conquered by Assyria. It's going to be actually conquered and then reconquered. Essentially, after the first round of the Assyrians, Egypt tries to throw them off. Not successful. Not successful. So they go in under Esarhaddon first, conquer Egypt, install a puppet governor, and then the Dynasty 25 sweeps in. Dynasty 25 sweeps in and boots out the puppet government and rules Egypt for, you know, pretty decent amount of time. I think about 90 years, I think is what they reign, off the top of my head. But then the Assyrians come back, and Ashurbanipal the first comes in and kicks them all out and installs Necho the first as king of Egypt. It's not long after this, though, that Assyria falls as an empire, so it's not a long-lived thing. But Egypt and Assyria do go to war. At the end, they're allies. The puppet government that Assyria installs, that 26th dynasty, is gonna basically fight on behalf of Assyria to defend them against the Babylonians and the Medes, and that's going to be a failure. So, Egypt and Assyria were, you know, Assyria did conquer Egypt, but Egypt also, you know, came to fight on behalf of Assyria also. Especially, as I said, during Dynasty 26, during the reign of Necho II. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, Russ Hardy for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Your views on Islam, Quran, and Muhammad. Ooh, that's a question that could get me into a lot of trouble with YouTube. One of the things I generally don't do on this channel is comment on Islam. YouTube community standards are very, very draconian when it comes to anything negative about Islam. Okay, you can just ask David Woods about that. You know, he eventually left YouTube because of YouTube's community standards in dealing with Islam. Now, with that said, however, I don't have how do I put this nicely? I have respect for Muslims. I don't have a high respect for their religion. Okay. I think that, I mean, for example, there are things about Islam that are just, you know, self-disqualifying as being, say, from the mouth of God. I also think that, for example, the Quran has some issues. There are potential text variants. There are, which is not surprising. Any book copied long enough will develop text variants. But there's things about certain apologetics for Muhammad and the Quran that I don't think bear out well. Like, for example, the whole idea that Pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea. There's no evidence of this. Absolutely none. In fact, everything we know about the Exodus Pharaoh says he didn't drown, that he wasn't at the Red Sea. But this is Islamic theology. But I can go into other things about Islamic theology, but I should probably cut it off right there. Otherwise, I'm just gonna get nailed by YouTube community standards, and I don't want that to happen. So, I want to thank you for the super chat. There's a lot of resources out there on Islam, Quran, and Muhammad, and it's not something I'd like to engage in, just because I want to sort of keep my channel alive. So, anyway, I respect the question. It's not a bad question. It's just one that is I can't really answer on YouTube. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Yeah, Sky. Rupee? Okay. Super chat here from Sky for 400 rupees. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. Is there any connection of tradition or religion between ancient Egypt and ancient India? No, not with tradition or religion, but trade. There is a connection between ancient India and ancient Egypt as far as trade goes. There doesn't seem to be any connection between cultural connection. Like we don't find any Indian loanwords or religious like deities, and Egypt collected deities like other people collect stamps and coins. Okay, ancient Egypt didn't find a foreign deity it didn't like. So, if people from India had, religious people from India had come to Egypt and proselytized, Egypt would have just sucked all that up. They would have been happy as pig in the mud. On the other hand, though, we do find strong evidence of trade, particularly spice trade, between India and Egypt. Like, for example, in the coffin of King Tut, we find whole cloves. Well, those grow in India. So, I mean, that's really strong evidence that there was a trading relationship happening between India and Egypt. Now, we don't know if it's Indian traders coming to Egypt or Egyptian traders coming to India or Semitic middlemen going between both. We don't know what the relationship is there. It could very likely be that it's a Semitic trader like Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites were very much part of the incense trade. So there's no reason why they couldn't have also been trading spices as well. So we do have very, very strong evidence of trade ties. But we don't have any evidence of tradition ties or religion or even diplomacy. So that's probably the extent of what we know, that they traded spices with India. Again, fascinating. It's fascinating to discover that. And It's very likely that the trade there went both ways. So Egypt does produce some of its own spices, and probably would have sent some of them back to India as well. Like, for example, cumin. Uh, we do know that ancient Egyptians produced a lot of cumin. They still do, by the way. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for that super chat. So the strongest connection is trade. And it's very interesting. Very, very interesting. The more we discover about these trade routes, the more interesting they become. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Okie dokie. Oh, mouthwash. This is so tiny on my screen, I have even difficulty reading this. Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, mouthwash, my modern Hebrew sucks. And the weather in Canada, still hot. It's still hot. Oh, boy. Yeah, my modern Hebrew is not great, honestly. A lot of it's different. It's very different. It's different in vocabulary. It's different in structure. So it's a reconstructed language. Or I should say, a resurrected language. Hebrew is a language that went dead twice. And very interesting. It's very interesting to see that Hebrew was a language that wasn't always only resurrected once, but a second time. It was first went dead in the 4th century, and then got resurrected again around 600 AD. And then after that, it died again as a spoken language in the late medieval period, and then was resurrected again in the 19th century. So, but yeah. Yeah, my modern Hebrew is not so hot. So, I appreciate the attempt, but no, my modern Hebrew is not very good. So, but anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I just wish it would cool down a bit. Ugh, ick. No, they don't believe in air conditioning in Vancouver, so we're just having to sweat it through. Okay, our next super chat is from AB for $49.99. Thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, what do you think Ham did wrong, and why did Noah curse the child and not Ham? Well, it isn't what a lot of people think it is. Okay? Let's pull that up, because I think this is worth actually find it here. Genesis 9:22. Here. I'm going to pull up the passage here. Read it. I'm going to exegete it. We'll start at verse 20. Okay. Noah, this is after the flood. Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside of his tent. Now this is part sort of that throws people off. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backwards, covering the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done. So he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers." Okay. Why did he curse the child and not Ham? Okay. Well, by cursing the child, he is cursing Ham. But there's a reason why. Now, people often think this is about seeing Noah nude. This is not what this passage is about. Not even close. When you see the phrase seeing the nakedness of his father, it's not talking about public nudity or private nudity. It's not talking about nudity at all. Remember, this is a culture where men will expose themselves to relieve themselves against the wall. You know, people will take off clothes to in the public to change. You know, this is not about exposure. Okay, that's not what's going on here. What's happening is this is Ham having sexual relations with Noah's wife. That's what this is. And you'll see this in the the law, where it says, you know, you shall not marry the wife of your father, for it exposes his nakedness. So that's the key word here. This is an expression of that a sexual relationship happened between Ham and Noah's wife. Now, we don't know if Noah's wife was Ham's mother or a subsequent marriage. Okay? More likely the latter, really. This is also why Shem and Japheth are taking the garment, putting it on both their shoulders, and walking backwards so that they cover up Noah's wife while not seeing her naked. Okay? So that's what is going on here. And why is he cursing Canaan? Because Canaan is the offspring of this relationship. That's why he's cursing Canaan. Canaan is the fruit of the relationship between Ham and Noah's wife. It puts a whole different spin on the story. Yeah. That's what Ham did wrong. He committed adultery with his father's wife. He was a very bad boy. Very naughty. And that's why the curse is on the child too. Because he's the result. So that's what's going on here. I hope that helped. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very generous, very much appreciated, and we're so grateful for your support. And I hope this answered your question. Okay, our next super chat is from John Febeck for 1999. Thank you very much for the super chat. Can't think of anything tonight. Enjoy the donation. Well, thank you so very much. We really, really appreciate it. As I said, all these donations really, really help us to keep this channel going. It puts food on our table. It helps pay our bills. It basically makes ends meet. And we couldn't do this without your help. So it really is helpful here. So we so appreciate the donations. So grateful for all your generosity. And we just we feel just incredibly blessed that we can not only answer your questions when you have them, but we also feel blessed when you help our ministry out as well. So thank you so very much. We really appreciate it. And I think we're down to the last super chat here. Mask of Shy for pen 5. Do you know what pen is? Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. I'm not sure what the currency is, but I'm sure someone in the live chat will tell us in just a moment. All right, he says, good night, Mr. Falk. I don't know if... Peruvian. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome to the live stream. Don't know if this was asked, but when Christ talks about everlasting life, this is the resurrection or is just an ideal but still finite life? Everlasting life begins at conversion. Begins at that point of salvation. Everlasting life is more than just, say, living forever. It's a qualitative thing. It's abundant life. So it's one of those things that's finite life is really kind of too small of a concept here when we talk about everlasting life. It never ceases, it never ceases, but it also isn't it isn't limited to just, say, the extension of, say, physical life or even the life in the resurrection. It's that it's life and life more abundant. So it's an amplification. So it's you have to kind of think here more of it being as a term of boundlessness. See if there's anything else I can just... Let me just see if I can grab a pad. See anything in the Greek here. Yeah, it's a lot of the times they use the ionos zoos. So it's a life. It's life in, say, the biological as well as sort of the qualitative sense here. That everlasting, boundless, eternal. So when Christ talks about this, it has sort of a several meanings that if there's any other words that are ionos zoe. But yeah, so that's really what's sort of going on in these when Christ talks about everlasting life. It's not just an ideal, but still finite life. It goes on and on and on and just gets better and better and better and better as it goes along. So that's what's sort of being communicated here when Christ talks about the whole everlasting life thing. It's age long. It has no, say, foreseeable terminus, but it also is one of those things that's just going to, say, perpetually get better as it progresses. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's good to see new people join the live stream. Also, it's really great, especially people from other countries. We have a very international audience here, and we love it. Absolutely love it. So it really makes me excited to see people from other countries, joining on the live streams. So thank you so very much. very much for the super chat and very much appreciate the question. Okay. It is already after 11, guys. I'm going to take 2 questions and then we're going to call it a night because I'm already exhausted. So we've already gone 3 hours. It's been a very, very busy night. So, okay. All right, Pablo, you mentioned a question twice, it looks like, so I'm going to exclude that. Let's see here. Let's see if there's some interest. Uh, let's see here. All right, I'll take this one. From historical strategy gaming. What did the Egyptians think about the practice of Canaanite human sacrifice? They thought it was savage. Now, the Egyptians thought that this was the practice of savages, essentially. They called the practice vile. Now, not vile in the sense of it being evil, but as being weak, wretched, something weaklings would do. So they're not making the Egyptians here are not making a moral statement against human sacrifice. They are making more of a judgment, a value judgment on Canaanite culture when they say this. Okay, so yeah, they would emphasize the Canaanite human sacrifice because it made them seem less superior to the Egyptians. It made them seem inferior. Now, Egyptians too practice human sacrifice, just never their own people. The Egyptians generally gave up the practice of human sacrifice, where they sacrificed their own people in the Second Dynasty. That's the last evidence we have of human sacrifice of Egyptians in Egypt. They, and that we find that at the tomb of Qasim Kemwe. So he's a Dynasty 2 king. He's the last king that we know sacrificed his retainers upon his death. Yeah, with the massive bloat of bureaucracy of ancient Egypt, that was a practice that wasn't going to last. Essentially, after the king dies, the bureaucrats are going to say, "Oh, I don't really want to sacrifice myself. Let's not do it." Then that's really how human sacrifice of retainers came to an end in Egypt. Was they just more or less all agreed that we're going to stop this. So, yeah, and there was no way to enforce it. King was dead. Long live the king. So there was But there was still some human sacrifice in Egypt, especially at temples. Now, it was done in a certain way, though. Slaves would be captured from, say, Canaan. They'd be brought back to Egypt. Their hands and feet were bound behind their backs, and then they were slain inside the temple as a form of human sacrifice. And we do find a bound prisoner that was sacrificed at the temple of Mut at Karnak, and it was found underneath the temple foundation. So it was found underneath the temple floor. So after they would sacrifice the prisoner, they would be buried underneath the temple as sort of a foundation deposit. So we do know that the Egyptians occasionally still practiced human sacrifice up at least until the New Kingdom, but they didn't sacrifice their own people. They sacrificed other people's people. And that's sort of the distinction here. This is why the Egyptians looked down on the Canaanites doing human sacrifice, because they were sacrificing their own. That made them seem less refined, more inferior in their eyes. Okay? So that's how the Egyptians viewed the practice of Canaanite human sacrifice. It wasn't that they had a moral objection to it. It was that to them, it made the Canaanites seem weak, pathetic, desperate. Which they were. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate the question. Okay, I'm going to take one more non-super chat and then we're going to call it a night. Okay, minimum. Again, looking for that Q and colon. No, there's not that many of them tonight. Not that many non-super chats. A lot of chats, but not a lot of questions in the non-super chats. At least none that are really catching my attention. This will be the last one. Take this one, and this will be the last one for the night. From the MRB. Could over-exaggerated ancient Near Eastern population numbers be due to them counting infant mortality rate? Impossible to say. It's impossible to say. We don't know why. We don't know why it's inflated. We just know it is. Whether it's from a translational error, it's possible that those units really represent family units of some kind. We don't, but then again, too, we also see this ancient Near Eastern inflation, population numbers inflated in things where children would not be applied, like armies. Well, you don't count infant mortality for armies. So we do see this in, like, for example, in the accounts of Alexander the Great. His numbers are very inflated. So is the accounts of Thermopylae. They're very inflated also. We wouldn't expect infant mortality rate to play in there. So, we can't say that it is infant mortality rate. We don't have the evidence for that. But then again, we don't have any good evidence for any other theory either as to why they are. We just know that they are. So anyway, that's going to be the last question of the night. We're going to put a stop to it here because I'm tired and I want to go to bed. So I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight on our live stream. Apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. And we do really appreciate everyone who came out tonight, who contributed a super chat. We thank you so much for your financial and very, very generous support. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters who also support us financially. We really appreciate that. We also want to thank our regular subscribers and viewers, you guys who leave comments, who leave likes and dislikes. You know, you guys help feed the algorithm. YouTube likes the algorithm fed, and the algorithm is so hungry. So anyway, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.